Welcome to the Gadsden Art Center and Museum and the exhibition Found, Vernacular Art and Gadsden Quilts. My name is Anissa Ford and I'm the Education Director here, and I'm very excited to share this exhibition with you today. The majority of the works that are on display are from our permanent collection, with some works borrowed, and these works have occasionally been on display in small groups, but never all together here at Gadsden Arts, so it's exciting to see them all together in this exhibition, especially because as a genre of art, part of vernacular art's history is that these artists weren't known for so long. Much of their work was found in private homes, cemeteries, yards, and it was often labeled as folk, visionary, outsider, or self-taught art. Despite all these titles, these artists are truly contemporary American artists. They were born between 1900 and 1965, and they created a visual language to describe, interpret, and express emotions about where they live, who they are, and the situations that surround them. All of these artists were creating art that is distinctly their own. Some of the artists didn't consider themselves artists at first, and many of the artists were creating art in secluded areas, without traditional art materials, without traditional art education, and sometimes with hardly any schooling at all. But they had stories to tell, and they told them through art. The word vernacular is most often used to mean the language or dialect spoken by the people in a particular country or region. By saying vernacular art, we're referring to the powerful ability of this art to demonstrate a visual language of a particular region, the South, and more specifically, the history and the experiences of the people who created this art. People create art for a variety of reasons. One artist might be creating art because they communicate better through images than words. Another artist might make art purely to make something visually beautiful. Another artist might create a work of art just to be shocking. For many of our vernacular artists in this exhibition, struggle and tragedy sparked a period of creativity. Art became an outlet to deal with their emotions. They had a strong sense of place or a sense of pride in their hometown, and they decided to create work about it or for it. The first artist we'll take a closer look at is Purvis Young, who has both dealt with struggles and has strong ties to his hometown. Purvis lived most of his life in Overtown, a neighborhood in Miami, Florida that is now bisected by an interstate. While Purvis enjoyed art as a child, he didn't take a serious interest in pursuing art until he was incarcerated for 3 years in the 1960s for a break-and-enter conviction, shortly after he dropped out of school. His time in prison rekindled his interest in art, and he says that angels told him, "This is not your life. You're going to have a different life. Listen and learn, Purvis." The untitled work from the Gadsden Arts' permanent collection was created using several manila office folders and envelopes that he painted, cut, stapled, and layered to create this final work of art. We have 3 large, haloed angels, their faces floating among these smaller crowds of figures and swirling, chaotic lines and colors. On that left side of the center of the work, there's a large green circle with a blue dot in the center, which is outlined to create the shape of an eye, watching over these scenes. The bottom right portion of the collage contains more of these large green circles and lines overlapping, more eyes watching as the crowds come to them. Purvis says that he paints the people going towards the eyes to tell these eyes which represent the white establishment and the so-called system, about their problems. He uses blue and green eyes specifically to refer to the white establishment. Purvis also spoke very highly of pregnant women and often depicted them in his art. In both Just Life and one of the untitled paintings, there is a large pregnant woman central to the composition. In both of those works, she's surrounded by additional people, all painted on a much smaller scale than the central woman. Purvis said he paints pregnant women because they are giving birth to a new nation. Perhaps none of the vernacular artists in this exhibition are so rooted in their home communities as the community of quilt makers from Gee's Bend. The 3 quilts in Found represent just 3 out of the 150 quilt makers of Gee's Bend. The patterns of these quilts are popular within the Gee's Bend quilting circles. Housetop patterns are particularly favored in the region, such as Quinny and Lola Petway's housetop blocks, in which the primary design is a concentric square. Concentric squares are squares that all share the same center, and to create them involves connecting the short end of one strip of fabric to the long end of the adjoining piece, creating right angles that echo the shape of the overall quilt. Some quilters will work with a central piece and form a housetop around it, extending outwards towards the edge, while others like Lola and Quinny created multiple housetop patterns within a single quilt. These housetops and Lucy Mingo's Roman stripe quilt, which is constructed out of blocks of 4 to 5 strips in a pattern that echoes Roman numerals, is also an excellent representation of the types of variations these women put into their quilts, a way of both working with a pattern and taking that basic pattern and making it their own. Probably the most renowned of all vernacular artists is Thornton Dial Sr. Throughout his life, Dial was a prolific artist, and he's now considered one of the creative geniuses of his time. Let's take a closer look at Struggling Tiger in Hard Times. When you first look at this piece, you see a chaotic, swirling image primarily of blues and greens. On a second glance, pops of black, white, and this reddish-brown emerge. A tiger, a net, a woman, and a tree appear, constructed out of rope, and they're thickly painted with enamel and oil paint. The abstractly constructed tiger sits at the top right portion of this assemblage, holding a net that has captured a woman. On the left third of the composition, there's a green, brown, and white and black mass of ropes and knots that form a tree-like shape. The ropes and knots that form the images of this work stand out several inches from the canvas, creating a high-relief, colossal painting. The most notable object in this piece is the tiger, and tigers are perhaps Thornton Dial's most frequently depicted symbols. Over time, the tiger has been known to symbolize Dial himself, as well as the African-American everyman and the struggles of living in a modern world, especially minority struggles for survival, for social justice, and freedom in America. Despite the fact that Dial's tigers are typically struggling, he says, "A tiger is always a tiger, dead or alive. It is my own way of showing the strength and the courage of a black man and his power to overcome troubles, just like a tiger." Interestingly, this particular piece was completed in 1991 and was prompted by the United States Senate confirmation hearings of the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, whose confirmation was intensely fought due to sexual harassment accusations. In response, Dial created this work, which illustrates that every person ultimately must answer for his actions. Dial compares a man's life to a fisherman dragging his nets. Another work by Dial that features a tiger is The Tiger Knocks the Lady Down and the Midget Runs Away. This work is part of a pair of works that forms an analogy between pet ownership and racial inequality. While the first piece is not in this exhibition, I can tell you that it depicts a tiger and a woman and has the ambiguous title of Lady Feeds the Tiger Cat, implying either that she is giving the tiger food or that she is the food. In the second piece, which we have here, the tiger has pounced. The woman is horizontal, her fingers literally hanging off the bottom edge of the piece, while the tiger stands above her, triumphant. In the bottom left, the little person, who is said to represent African Americans, has escaped the control of this woman. In the background, a swirling chorus of eyes watches, awaiting the outcome. If the tiger is meant to represent Dial himself and the little person African Americans, then who does this woman represent? Though Dial hasn't said exactly, we can infer that perhaps there is a sense of false power on the woman's part. After all, she has gotten too close to this tiger, perhaps thinking that she can tame it, realizing too late that this tiger cannot be tamed. The next artist we'll take a close look at is Edward Mumma, or Mr. Eddie as he is known, who created all of his art in the last 17 years of his life, primarily in seclusion in Gainesville, Florida. Visually, Mr. Eddie's artworks are very recognizable at first glance. The two works in this exhibition, sitting on the pedestals toward the front of the gallery, are perfect examples of his style and his drive to cover every surface with art. Each piece by Mumma features an oval face with the continuous line between the eyebrows and nose and dotted eyes, frequently with a straight line for a mouth, and nearly always with hands just in front of the figure's torso. The costuming and hair of each figure is unique, but the face is always the same, and always recognizable even before you spot his signature, Eddie. Mumma is not the only artist in this exhibition whose artistic career was fueled in part by an illness. O.L. Samuels' artistic career began in 1982. While on the job as a tree surgeon in Tallahassee, Samuels was seriously injured and spent a lengthy 3-year recovery in a wheelchair. Samuels carves sculptures in a variety of sizes, including life-size sculptures, and often spends months on each piece. His sculptures are painted with a secret concoction of paint, glitter, sawdust, and glue that he warms on the stove and uses as a skin for his sculptures. Although he is colorblind, Samuels paints several layers of wild, expressive colors, saying that he uses every color so he doesn't leave any out. Gadsden Arts has 2 of his large-scale sculptures upstairs, Angel and Godzilla, as well as a smaller sculpture Firefly and a sculpture in the lobby. We also have a rare object for Samuels, a wall painting. Samuels depicts his angel in his distinctive style, brightly colored, glittery paint, and adorned with jewelry and makeup. Angel even dons false eyelashes and gold teeth. O.L. Samuels is a lay minister and puts the spirit into everything he creates. Most likely, Angel is a substitute minister for him, a missionary of sorts, sharing O.L.'s attitude and message through her unique presence. Godzilla, right next to Angel, is a 7-foot-tall sculpture. This imaginary creature is made from a discarded telephone pole and is actually part of a husband and wife set of these beasts. Godzilla is the female, and her husband, according to the artist, now lives in Atlanta, Georgia. In this gallery, we have 3 additional Florida artists. All 3 of them are women. Ruby Williams has one work on display, a brightly colored work called Piano Playing Cow, I Give Better Buttermilk, which can be easily spotted from across the room. In this gallery, we have 3 additional Florida artists. All 3 of them are women. Ruby Williams has one work on display, a brightly colored work called Piano Playing Cow, I Give Better Buttermilk, which can be easily spotted from across the room. To the left of Ruby Williams' painting is a painting by Eileen Harris. Harris was born in Gainesville, Florida in 1942 and has always been driven to create art. Harris creates spiritual and vibrant paintings centered on her experience as an African-American woman in the South. Themes such as religion, the natural landscape, the dichotomy of good and bad, celebrations of everyday life, and the struggles of slavery are frequent features of her paintings. In the work we have here, The Baptism, there's a group of people in front of their rural church at a baptism that will be performed in the lake in the foreground. Most of the African-American parishioners in attendance are wearing white robes, and the children stand in front with their arms outstretched. Like both Ruby Williams and Eileen Harris, the final artist we'll look at uses her art as a way to touch on themes of religion. However, Mary Proctor's artworks more specifically focus on being a missionary. She even signs her artwork Missionary Mary L. Proctor. Her artworks are a mixture of prayer, scripture, and storytelling, all expressing her trust in God and encouraging the viewer, and likely also herself, to trust him despite the struggles. Now, if you're looking to learn about the harsh struggles and the lasting faith of Mary Proctor, look no further than her work Self-Portrait. On a large window with 6 window panes, the artist has depicted herself jumping with her mouth open and her hands raised. The window is painted shades of light blue, and while Proctor's face, hands, and legs are painted, her clothing and hat are painted a gold color, and then she has glued broken shards of glass in various colors all over her clothing. She's also glued these shards of glass on the sides of the window frame. A few small angels and suns fly around her, but what stands out the most besides her self-portrait is an assortment of text throughout the piece. Surrounding her are statements about her life and faith, such as, "Have you ever saw a mirror that broke in pieces? That's how my life has been, and only the Lord is picking me up, and He is still mending my broken pieces back together again." The piece also says, "God is able to mend you if you trust Him. When my grandmama, aunt, and uncle burned to death, He's mending me. When my child got in an incident, He mend us. When you trust Him, He sees you through. God is still mending us. When I walk in hospital, I lost my feeling on my right knee. God bless." And then her signature, Missionary Mary L. Proctor. Interestingly, this window came from Leon High School in Tallahassee. Proctor created the work for a fundraiser for the school when they installed new windows sometime in the 1990s. Visionary, outsider, folk, self-taught, vernacular, contemporary, whatever the genre of art that the artists in this exhibition come to be known as is still debated. Many of the artists fall into many different categories. Visionary artists who began creating art because of spiritual visions, outsider artists who lived in secluded lives outside of society, folk artists or self-taught artists who created art without traditional art education, vernacular artists whose art is rooted in their communities and histories. While so many of these artists have similarities in their art, a history of struggle and tragedy, the use of art as a ministry, the use of found materials, abstracted or simplified depictions of people or animals, complex textures and dynamic compositions. While they have these similarities, it's difficult to group these artists because each of these artists was working outside of the traditional academic art structures. Few of these artists were looking at other artists for inspiration or other artistic traditions. They were driven to create their own images, their own stories through art. Each artist in this exhibition is most predominantly influenced by his or her own life or circumstances, family, story, and history. We titled this exhibition Found for two reasons. One, most of the artists use unconventional materials that they found. Second, because these artists were working outside the traditional art world, we may not have ever seen their work if they hadn't started putting it in their yards, inviting us to find it or to discover them. Thankfully, they were found, and now we have this opportunity to share their stories.